The first time I saw my own obituary, I was lying in a hospital bed in Costa Rica, learning to walk again. I didn't know it was my obituary at first. I didn't know my own name. The nurses called me La Turista, the tourist, because I had been found on a beach with no identification, no memory, and a head injury that had reduced my past to static. I spoke English. That was all anyone knew about me. That, and the fact that someone had hurt me badly enough to leave me for dead. The obituary was on a phone. A young nurse named Gabriela was showing it to another nurse, speaking rapid Spanish I was only beginning to understand. She saw me watching, and with the kindness of people who don't know they are about to detonate your life, she turned the screen toward me. Turista estadounidense asesinada en playa de Guanacaste. Esposo devastado pide justicia. American tourist murdered on Guanacaste Beach. Devastated husband demands justice. The photo was mine. Not a recent one, a professional headshot from my accounting firm's website, the one where I was smiling with teeth that had cost me 3 years of braces. Vivian Cole, 37, beloved wife of Richard Cole, found dead after apparent kidnapping by criminal gang. Body recovered from mass grave. Identified by dental records provided by husband. Memorial service to be held in Scottsdale, Arizona. I stared at the screen. I stared at my own death, reported with the confidence of a man who had buried me while I was still breathing. "That's me," I said. My voice was hoarse, damaged from the tube that had been down my throat during the coma. "That's my face. I'm not dead." Gabriela looked at the phone. She looked at me. She looked back at the phone. Then she crossed herself and ran for the doctor. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're here, maybe you know what it means to have your own life erased by someone who was supposed to love you. Maybe you know the particular horror of reading about your own death while you're still trying to remember how to live. If this is your first time, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories here about women who come back from the dead, not as ghosts, but as proof. Here's my story. Here's my story. I met Richard Cole at a conference in Chicago. I was 30, a senior accountant at a firm that handled corporate insurance, and he was a keynote speaker, charming, handsome, the kind of man who remembered names and asked follow-up questions and made you feel like the most interesting person in the room. He was perfect. That should have been my first warning. Perfect men are either saints or performances, and saints don't pursue women with the calculated intensity Richard brought to our courtship. He isolated me gently. He suggested my friends were draining my energy. He pointed out that my family was toxic, that my mother was controlling, that my sister was jealous. He encouraged me to quit my job, "You're too talented to be someone's employee," and to let him manage our finances. "You're anxious about money," he said. "Let me handle it. That's what partners do." I was anxious about money. I was anxious about everything. Richard had a way of identifying my fears and offering himself as the solution. He was the wall between me and the world. He was the reason I felt safe. I didn't notice that safety was becoming a cage, that my anxiety was becoming a diagnosis. He used to dismiss my concerns. That the friends I stopped seeing were the ones who would have noticed the bruises before they became routine. We married after 8 months. Small ceremony, his idea, intimate, is more meaningful. My mother wasn't invited. Neither was my sister. Just Richard's colleagues, his business associates, the people who mattered to his image. The marriage was a ledger of small erosions. He controlled the accounts. He monitored my phone. He decided where we traveled, what we ate, who we saw. When I questioned him, he was patient, concerned, loving. "You're spiraling, Vive. Your anxiety is acting up. Let me handle this." I let him handle everything. Until Costa Rica. We were there for a romantic getaway, his idea, booked without consulting me. I discovered the night before we left that he had transferred $400,000 from our joint account to an offshore holding company. I confronted him on the beach, at sunset, the waves loud enough to cover my voice. "Richard, where is the money?" He didn't deny it. He didn't explain. He just looked at me with the disappointment of a man whose property had malfunctioned. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said. "Not yet." "Yet, Richard, that's our savings. My inheritance from my father." "What are you doing? Protecting us," he said. "Protecting our future. You don't understand finance, Vive. You never have. That's why I handle it." "I understand that $400,000 is missing," I said. My voice was shaking. "I understand that you're lying to me. I understand that I want a divorce." His face changed. The mask slipped. I saw something I had never seen before, not anger but calculation. The look of a man measuring cost against benefit. "You're not getting a divorce," he said quietly. You're not getting anything. He hit me then. Not a slap, a closed fist to the temple, hard enough to send me sprawling into the sand. I tried to stand. He hit me again. I tasted blood, salt, the metallic tang of consciousness leaving my body. The last thing I saw was his shoes, Italian leather. The ones I had bought him for our anniversary, walking away across the sand. The last thing I felt was the tide rising, cold water on my legs, pulling me toward the darkness. I woke up in a hospital 3 weeks later. I had been in a coma. I had a skull fracture, a brain bleed, and no memory of who I was. The fishermen who found me had called the police. The police had called the American consulate. The consulate had checked missing persons reports and found nothing, because Richard had never reported me missing. He had reported me dead. The dental records were the key. Richard had provided them to the Costa Rican authorities, along with a story about a kidnapping, a ransom demand, a failed rescue. He had identified a body, not mine, some other unlucky woman in a mass grave, and he had buried her as Vivian Cole. He had collected $2.3 million in life insurance. He had sold our house, our cars, my jewelry. He had moved to Arizona and started over, and I had been lying in a hospital bed, learning to say my own name again while he spent my death. The recovery was slow. Months of physical therapy to walk again. Speech therapy to form words that had been knocked loose from my brain. Occupational therapy to relearn how to dress myself, feed myself, exist in a body that felt foreign and fragile. But the hardest part was the memory. It came back in fragments. A face, a name, a sensation of sand in my mouth. And then one morning, watching Gabriella's phone, the flood, Richard, the marriage, the money, the fist, the shoes walking away, I remembered everything, and I understood that I was legally dead, that my husband had killed me twice, once on the beach and again on paper. I contacted the American consulate. I proved my identity through fingerprints, through old medical records they retrieved from my childhood pediatrician, through the slow, bureaucratic process of resurrection. I was declared alive, my death certificate voided, my identity restored. But Richard was already gone. The money was spent. The insurance company had closed the case. And when I tried to report him, I discovered the cruel mathematics of my situation. I had no proof of the assault. The body in the grave was someone else, unidentifiable, unavailable for exhumation. Richard had covered his tracks with the thoroughness of a man who had planned this for months, maybe years. The police in Costa Rica were sympathetic but limited. The FBI told me that insurance fraud across borders was complex. The lawyers I consulted quoted retainers I couldn't afford. Richard had taken everything. So I made a decision. If the system couldn't give me justice, I would become the system. I would learn Richard's game, and I would beat him at it. I spent 5 years becoming someone else. Not a new identity. I kept Vivian Cole, the name he had tried to erase. But a new version of her, stronger, smarter, patient. I got a job at an insurance fraud investigation firm. I started as an assistant, making coffee and filing reports, but I had an accountant's mind and a survivor's focus. I learned the industry from the inside. I learned how policies were written, how claims were processed, how loopholes were exploited. I learned the language of actuarial tables and risk assessment and beneficiary designations. I got certified. I got promoted. I became the investigator other investigators called when a case was complicated, when the fraud was sophisticated, when the perpetrator was smart enough to hide in the system's blind spots. And all the while, I tracked Richard. He wasn't hard to find. He had changed his last name to Carlisle, but he hadn't changed his face. He was living in Scottsdale, in a house purchased with my insurance money, running a consulting firm that seemed to do no consulting. He was engaged to a woman named Tiffany, 29, blonde, the kind of woman who posted photos of her brunch on Instagram and believed that her fiancé was a self-made entrepreneur. I documented everything: the properties he bought, the cars he leased, the trips he took, the way he had structured the insurance payout through shell companies to avoid taxes. I built a case so thorough it would have made my old accounting professors weep with pride, but I didn't go to the police. Not yet. I was waiting for the right moment. The moment when Richard would be most visible, most vulnerable, most publicly committed to the lie that was his life. Then I saw the wedding announcement. It was in a society magazine, the kind that covers lifestyle events for the wealthy and wannabe-wealthy of Scottsdale. Richard Carlisle and Tiffany Brooks to wed at the Royal Palms Resort. A celebration of love, renewal, and new beginnings. The wedding was budgeted at $400,000. Paid for, I knew, with the last of my insurance money. The venue was exclusive, the guest list was elite, and the narrative was perfect. A wealthy widower, tragically bereaved, finding love again with a younger woman who made him feel alive. I read the announcement 3 times, then I booked a flight. I didn't RSVP officially. I used an alias, Sarah Mitchell, a name I had created for undercover investigations. I rented a dress, black, not because I was in mourning, but because black is the color of authority, of finality, of the space between what was and what is. I arrived at the resort early. I sat in the lobby, watching the guests arrive in their summer suits and cocktail dresses, listening to them talk about Richard's tragic first marriage and his amazing resilience. I heard a woman say, his first wife died in Costa Rica, you know, some kind of cartel thing. Horrible, poor Richard, her companion replied, but Tiffany is such an upgrade. The first wife was a nervous type, apparently, always anxious. Richard basically had to manage her. I sipped my sparkling water and I counted my breaths. I had waited 7 years for this. I could wait through the ceremony. It was held in the resort's garden, a fairy tale setting with white roses and string lights, and an aisle that looked like it had been ordered from a wedding catalog. Tiffany walked down it in a dress that cost more than my first car. Richard waited at the altar, handsome and composed, the picture of a man who had earned his happiness. I watched them exchange vows. I watched them kiss. I watched them walk back down the aisle as husband and wife while the guests applauded the triumph of love over loss. Then the reception, the dinner, the speeches. Richard's best man, a business associate I recognized from old photos, toasted to new beginnings and the woman who taught Richard to love again. Richard took the microphone. He looked out at his guests, at his new wife, at the life he had built on my grave. Thank you all, he said. Some of you know that I lost my first wife in tragic circumstances. That loss taught me how precious life is, how fragile, how important it is to seize happiness when you find it. Tiffany, he turned to her, his eyes glistening with practiced emotion, you are my second chance, my proof that love survives even death. I stood up. The room was large, but my heels were loud on the marble floor. Heads turned. Richard saw me, and for a fraction of a second, his composure cracked. He saw a ghost. He saw the woman he had left on a beach, the woman he had buried, the woman he had spent $2.3 million to forget. Then the mask snapped back. He smiled, the charming smile of a man who had talked his way out of worse situations. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, I think we have an uninvited guest. Security, uninvited, I said, my voice carried. I had practiced this in the mirror, in empty conference rooms, in the shower. Richard, I was invited. I RSVP'd, Sarah Mitchell, but you might know me better by my married name. I paused, Vivian Cole, your first wife, the one who died in Costa Rica. The room went silent. Tiffany looked at Richard, then at me, confusion giving way to dawning horror. You're confused, Richard said, his voice tight. My first wife is dead. This is some kind of sick joke. No joke, I said. I walked to the head table. I reached into my bag, a simple black clutch, professional, unthreatening, and I pulled out a document. I placed it on the wedding cake, the frosting smudging the ink slightly. This is my death certificate, I said. Signed by you, Richard, or should I say, signed by Richard Cole, grieving husband. Funny thing about death certificates, they're supposed to be accurate. This one says I died on March 15, 2018. But I have medical records from a hospital in San Jose, Costa Rica, showing I was very much alive on June 3, 2018. 3 months after my funeral. I pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen. The projector I had arranged, bribed a technician to set up during the ceremony, lit the wall behind the head table with images. The wire transfer from our joint account to the offshore holding company. The insurance claim with Richard's signature. The photo of me in the hospital, dated 3 months after my death, my face swollen but unmistakably alive. And the letter Richard had written to the insurance company, pleading for prompt resolution due to the emotional toll of my devastating loss. Tiffany picked up the letter. She read it. She looked at Richard. You told me your first wife was murdered, she said. Her voice was small, cracking. You told me you identified her body. I did identify a body, Richard said. His voice was desperate now, the smooth charm eroding into something raw and ugly. There was confusion, the dental records you provided, I said, from a dentist who doesn't exist, for a body that was never properly examined. For a woman who wasn't me. I turned to the guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not dead. I am not a ghost. I am a woman who was assaulted by her husband, left for dead on a beach, and declared deceased so he could collect $2.3 million in life insurance. That money bought this wedding. That money bought this house. That money bought the lie you're all celebrating tonight. I looked at Richard. You wanted me dead, Richard. You got 2 years of my life, 2 years of hospitals and therapy and learning to walk again, while you spent my death on cars and houses and a new wife. But you made one mistake. What? He whispered. You didn't make sure I was dead, I said, and I am very, very good at accounting. I stepped back. The room was chaos now, Tiffany crying, guests standing, security finally pushing through the crowd. But I didn't run. I had already won. The images were on the wall, the documents were on the cake. The truth was in the room and it was breathing. Richard was arrested 3 days later. Not for murder, I was alive after all, and proving attempted murder across international borders was beyond the resources I had. But for insurance fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and identity theft, the $2.3 million, traced through shell companies and offshore accounts, was enough to put him away for 15 years. Tiffany divorced him before the trial. She testified against him, providing emails and financial records that corroborated my evidence. She wrote me a letter once, apologizing. I didn't respond. I didn't blame her, but I didn't have forgiveness to spare. I didn't get the money back. It was gone, spent on the wedding, the house, the lifestyle that Richard had used to build his new identity. But I got something else. I got my name in the newspapers, not as a victim, but as a survivor. I got to walk into a bank and open an account as Vivian Cole, alive and well. I got to vote, to travel, to exist in a world that had been told I was dead. And I got a career. After Richard's arrest, my firm promoted me to senior investigator. I specialized in cases like mine, people declared dead for profit, identities stolen by family members, insurance fraud that hid behind grief. I became known as the investigator who had solved her own murder. I opened my own agency 2 years later. Cole Resurrections, Investigative Services for the Declared Dead. My business card reads, Vivian Cole, declared deceased 2018, resurrected 2019, available for consultations. I help people like me. The woman whose husband declared her dead after a hiking accident, then moved to Florida with his mistress. The man whose brother forged his death certificate to inherit the family business. The teenager whose parents declared her dead to collect on a policy they had taken out without her knowledge. I find them. I prove they are alive. I give them back their names. And sometimes when the case is closed and the paperwork is filed, I sit in my office and I look at the copy of my death certificate that I keep framed on the wall. Not as a trophy, as a reminder of who I was, of who I became, of the woman who walked out of the ocean and into a courtroom and took back her life from the man who had buried it. I am Vivian Cole. I am 4 years old. I was declared dead by my husband, and I came back to declare the truth. If you are reading this, and someone is trying to erase you, to diminish you, to declare you less than you are, to bury you while you're still breathing, know this. Your existence is the evidence. Your heartbeat is the proof. And the woman who survives her own death is the most dangerous creature in any room. See you in the next story.